The meadow edge held its breath. Silence stretched across the tall grass until the fox family breached the tree line. Papa Finn led, moving with heavy measured steps, his body held in a sharp defensive line. Mama Flora followed her head, pivoting to scan the clearing with sharp, unblinking focus. Ash trailed behind, eyes locked on the shadows. Then Bree broke the formation. She darted forward, a streak of motion, toward the center of the clearing. There, Cole waited. He did not move as she approached, but his presence was a physical weight in the air. Bree dropped a pile of blackberries directly before the bear and retreated 2 steps. Cole froze. He did not eat. He did not even look at the fruit. His gaze locked onto the 5 foxes, his muscles bunching beneath his skin, coiled to launch into a sprint or a strike. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the primitive friction of 2 different worlds colliding. He shifted his weight, his claws digging deep into the soft earth, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. No one moved. The wind died down. The entire meadow seemed to wait for the bear to make his choice. The berry sat between them, a small dark mound in the dirt. Cole kept his gaze fixed on the foxes, his ears flattened against his skull. He looked at the fruit, then shifted his eyes to Bree. She did not retreat further. She sat, her tail curled neatly around her paws, waiting. The seconds dragged, measured only by the rhythmic rise and fall of the bear's chest. Then Cole let out a low, vibrating rumble that stirred the dust at his feet. It was not a growl of aggression, but a deep, resonant sound that carried across the clearing. Bree chirped back, a sharp, clear note that cut through the heavy silence. Cole's head tilted, the tension in his shoulders vanished, his massive frame sinking as he settled back onto his haunches. The coiled energy in his muscles dissipated. He reached out, his nose twitching as he sampled the scent of the berries. Papa Finn exhaled, a long, audible rush of breath. "They will be fine," he whispered, the sound barely audible over the rustle of the leaves. It was a fragile start, a bridge built over a chasm of instinct. But for the first time, the bear did not look at them as a threat. The silence of the meadow felt different now, not empty, but expectant. Trust was not built in a single hour. For 3 consecutive days, the foxes returned as the light faded toward dusk. They always kept a safe distance, dropping food and remaining still, watching the bear. On the first day, Cole maintained a perimeter of 5 fox lengths. He ate only after they had retreated back into the brush. By the second day, the rhythm of their visits had softened the air. Cole allowed Bree to close the gap to just 2 lengths. He no longer tracked their every movement with his eyes, but watched them with a steady, quiet focus. On the 3rd day, the routine shifted. The foxes arrived, but Cole did not wait for them to drop the food and leave. He stood his gait uneven and laboured, his weight shifting heavily to his left side. He moved to the centre of the clearing, his eyes locking onto the group. Then, with a slow, deliberate exhale, he collapsed. He settled onto his side, his breath coming in rhythmic, heavy clouds. He stretched his right front paw outward, laying it flat against the cooling earth. He remained motionless, his gaze fixed on them, waiting for the next move. Ember stepped forward, her movements precise and measured. She approached the extended limb, her nose hovering inches from the fur. The paw was bloated, the skin stretched tight, and discolored. She reached out, her small, nimble paws tracing the line of the injury. The swelling travelled upward, winding from the pads of the toes all the way to the joint. It was a mass of hardened, matted fur and inflamed tissue. She pressed gently. The skin did not yield, indicating deep-seated pressure. A jagged dark mark scarred the centre of the limb, suggesting a long-standing puncture from a sharp root or a splintered rock. The injury had clearly festered for weeks, perhaps months. Each time Cole moved, the weight of his body must have pushed against the raw, infected tissue. The foxes gathered closer, their eyes fixed on the sight. They moved in silence, observing the way the inflammation had forced him into a sluggish, limping gait. The reality of his pain became undeniable. It was not a fresh accident, but a slow, grinding endurance of agony that had defined his every step. Ash leaned in, his whiskers twitching as he caught the faint, metallic scent of infection radiating from the wound. Mama Flora did not hesitate. She turned away from the group and disappeared into the dense thicket at the edge of the clearing. Seconds later, she returned, her jaws filled with a clump of damp, cool moss gathered from the shaded brook bank. She moved to the side of the bear, her shadow falling across his front limb. With delicate precision, she pressed the wet, dark vegetation directly against the inflamed skin. The moisture seeped into the matted fur. Cole remained perfectly still. He did not flinch, nor did he pull the limb away from the cold, abrasive touch of the moss. His breathing slowed, the heavy, ragged rhythm evening out into long, steady draws of air. He turned his head, his dark, deep-set eyes tracking Flora as she worked. He watched her hands move, watched the way she smoothed the moss against the swelling, and watched as she secured the greenery against the raw tissue. There was no tension in his frame, no reflexive twitch of muscle. He simply observed, his gaze locked onto hers. The silence in the clearing deepened, punctuated only by the soft rustle of leaves and the rhythmic sound of their breathing. In that exchange, the barrier of his size and his status as a predator vanished, replaced by a quiet shared focus on the healing of the wound. The routine held for 7 days. Each evening at dusk, the foxes returned to the clearing. They brought fresh supplies, and Cole waited in the same patch of flattened grass. As the swelling in his paw receded, the initial caution evaporated. They stopped relying on scent alone. A system of signals took root. A sharp click from Papa Finn meant stay. A rhythmic thump of a tail against the earth from Cole signaled his readiness for the moth. Bree developed a habit of tilting her head to gauge his response, to which Cole would respond with a slow, deliberate blink. They were learning the cadence of one another. By the end of the week, the wound was a pale, clean line of healing tissue. Cole could stand without a limp, his weight distributed evenly across all 4 paws. Yet, as the physical burden lifted, his behavior fractured. He would stop mid-chew, the blackberry still held in his teeth, and turn his head toward the north. His gaze locked onto the distant ridge beyond the deep wood. He would remain frozen, ears swiveled, ignoring the foxes entirely. He began to emit a low, repetitive vocalization that sounded like a question caught in his throat. It was not a sound of pain, but a sound of searching. The berries lay untouched before him. Cole did not reach for them. He did not look at the foxes. His head remained fixed toward the northern ridge. His jaw clamped tightly shut. He sat with his back rigid, his front paws anchored deep into the soil. Each claw furrowed the dirt, carving parallel lines as he leaned his entire weight toward the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and high-altitude ice, yet he did not blink. His eyes, dark and wide, remained locked on the distant, jagged silhouette of the mountain range. Minutes passed. The foxes moved around him, but their presence did not register. He was a statue of focused intent, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. He leaned further. His neck muscles corded under his pelt. The silence in the clearing changed. It was no longer the quiet of a resting animal, but the heavy, expectant silence of a sentry waiting for a command that never came. He remained trapped in that singular posture, his gaze drilling into the distance, ignoring the life around him, to feed on the emptiness of the north. He did not turn. He did not shift. He remained a monument to a memory, his entire being coiled toward the ridge. The stillness finally broke. A low, vibrating hum started deep in Cole's chest, rolling outward like distant thunder. It was not a growl. It was a sequence. 3 short notes, a long pause, and a sharp ascending pitch that hung in the evening air. He repeated the pattern, his throat muscles pulsing with the strain of the output. The foxes stopped their grooming. Ash stood up, his ears swiveling forward to catch the precise cadence. He took a hesitant step toward the bear, his head tilting in rhythm with the sound. The notes were consistent, precise, and hauntingly deliberate. Ash watched the way Cole's mouth moved, not in a snarl, but in a precise shaping of air. It was a call, a structured, repetitive signal designed to travel across the valley and over the ridge. Ash glanced back at the others, his expression hardening as the truth settled in. This was not the sound of a forest animal reacting to the wind. It was a desperate, intelligent plea directed at a specific target. Each time the sequence ended, Cole waited, his entire posture expectant, as if he were measuring the silence that followed for a response. The rhythm continued, the notes hanging heavy in the cooling air. The foxes stood in a half circle, their movements arrested by the sound. Ember watched the rise and fall of the bear's chest, the way his jaw worked against the air. She moved through the grass, placing her paws carefully so as not to disturb the sequence. When she reached a point just feet from his flank, she stopped. She kept her eyes locked on his profile. The wind died down, and for a heartbeat, the clearing was devoid of all sound. Ember opened her mouth. She formed the syllables with precision, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Mother, the effect was instantaneous. Cole's vocalization cut off mid-note. He did not growl. He did not retreat. He snapped his head toward her with the speed of a striking viper. His dark eyes widened, the pupils expanding until the edges of his irises vanished into shadow. He held her gaze, his breath hitching in his throat. The mask of the stoic wanderer shattered. He did not look away, his focus pinning her to the spot. A silent, sudden acknowledgement that the name had struck home. Every muscle in his body turned to stone, locked in the sheer weight of the recognition. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer filled with the tension of a mystery, but with the heavy shared weight of an ending. Cole's gaze did not waver. He remained fixed on Ember, his heavy breathing slowing until it matched the steady rhythm of the forest. The fur along his spine smoothed, the rigidity leaving his frame. He turned his head slowly, looking toward the northern ridge, where the last light of day bled into purple shadows. He did not vocalize again. He did not move. He simply existed in that space of recognition. Mama Flora took a step forward, then another, until she was close enough to touch the thick, coarse fur of his side. She did not speak. She sat down. One by one, the others followed. Papa Finn, Ash and Bree formed a quiet, watchful circle around the bear. They were no longer separate species, separated by fear or injury. They were witnesses. Cole lowered his head, resting his chin against the damp earth. He let out a long, shuddering breath that stirred the grass. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the clearing in cool, grey twilight. But no one moved to leave. They stayed together, bound by the quiet acknowledgement of a loss that had finally been given a name.